if you're making sure you're in the right room, we're going to talk about identity. And really, I'm going to let these guys explain what that really means in terms of like the blockchain. To get started, we're just going to go down the row and do a very quick introduction. Very quick intro. And I'll start. I'm Taylor. I run MyCrypto, which is a wallet interface thing for Ethereum. I'm also just like super interested in seeing how identity and reputation can, I don't know, do magical things with the blockchain and how it's going to evolve over the coming years. So yeah.
Hey, my name's Michael. I'm a co-founder of 3Box. Excited to be here. Yeah, so that's a quick background and intro. I'm obviously really interested in identity. I was formerly a co-founder of uPort as well. So I've been thinking about some of these things for quite a while.
How you doing? I'm Scott. I'm from Portis, one of the co-founders. Thank you for all coming to our talk today, and we're excited to dive in a bit about identity.
I'm Jonny, product design lead at uPort. uPort is identity protocol layers. We build developer tools, some consumer-facing stuff, building on DIDs and verifiable credentials.
Cool. I'm Sean from Fortmatic, and we're trying to solve identity with key management.
Hi, I'm David Gold, CEO of Dapix, the company that's built the first version of the FIO protocol. And the FIO protocol is doing for blockchain what HTTP did for the internet, making it easy to use through a service layer that handles workflow, data, confirmations about sending of transactions and other chains.
Awesome. First off, I'd like to thank you for keeping that short. That was amazing. Off to a good start. All right, so I really want to kind of set the stage, and I want to kind of understand what does identity mean in this sort of decentralized universe. I think a lot of people are familiar with like government-issued identity, but how does that translate to the blockchain, and what does it all mean?
Well, I'll start. What the heck? What goes next? I would say that identity comes in three forms. The first form, which is probably the one that's most common in the blockchain world, which is simply, does this person or computer have the right to access my platform or my software? So that's an identity thing. Second is, who is that person, if it's a person? And the third thing is that I need to know something about that person, right? Not just who they are, but some specifics about them, maybe what drugs they're on in the healthcare world or something like that. If I'm a doctor, right, I need to know that. So those are, to me, are the three levels of identity, and they relate to each other, but they're each different.
Yeah, I was going to say that the only, I guess, a little nuanced thing that I think about is trying to separate the term identifier from identity, and that identities can be attached to many identifiers, and even one identifier can represent a couple of different identities if people are acting together in some way. So that's like a thing that I think often gets conflated, and they think that ETH addresses are identities. But yeah, I think that there's a little bit of something we should be aware of when we're using those words, I guess.
Yeah. At Portis, the simplest form of identity we look at is private keys. And why we think about private keys as identity, and where that really stems from, is why blockchain was even created, which is all about trust. So I enjoy thinking about having trustless systems and why we need to have that identity, and creating different safeguards which will enable usability and also still have that security at the same time. But for us, our core belief is just identity is a private key.
To add on to that, I feel like the private key is very important. And I think the key acts as a sort of a container of identities, right? And I feel like to really make identity meaningful, you have to look into kind of have a composite of identities. Right? Maybe there's token issued by a government. Maybe there's a KYC token, right, in the future that would be actually legal and available to the world, right? There could be identities that's issued by, different applications. So I feel like a person's identity really is a composite of different identities that is contained in the key, which is very important.
Yeah, I think the pattern, or sort of like what we can extrapolate, is that like sort of how I've been thinking about things is that identity is an industry. It's really hard, like when the blockchain first got started, the term self-sovereign identity was like really popular and thrown around, and I think it sort of attached us too strongly to that word when you really should be thinking about identity in all of the ways that everyone's saying, because it's like it can be a private key, like it can be a more persistent identifier. Some people use it as like proof of individuality, which is like your government ID, or you know, anti-Sybil, which is like you're likely not a robot. And so all of these things sort of come together, I think, to like deliver more complete decentralized identity systems. But it's like really hard to pick one thing and sort of get aligned on that, because it's so many at the same time.
Yeah, I think these are all really, really excellent points, and I think that overarchingly, what you guys all kind of touched on was like, when we think about government identity, it's like maybe like 50 different types of identity wrapped into one, and on the blockchain, we're kind of deconstructing and reconstructing it in a different way. So on that note, you know, what are you sort of excited about, you know, like in the far future? What makes you most excited about having identity on the blockchain beyond just, you know, like an authentication mechanism or a private key? Like, you know, big, bold idea, 10-year vision. Like, what excites you about identity? Anyone?
I'll start. I guess one of the biggest things that were very exciting is that this can kind of fundamentally change how identity is done in the traditional Web 2 world. In the traditional Web 2 world, the identities are issued by kind of centralized repositories of identity providers, right, like Facebook and Google. But you know, in the blockchain world, blockchain is actually the identity provider by generating the keys. And then, you know, different parties will have different ways of managing the keys instead. But they're not necessarily the creator of the identity, right? And there's a lot of potential that can be built on top of that. That it's inherently better than traditionally how we trust really, really big companies on kind of managing these identities. So I think there's a lot of potential there. It's kind of an iterative improvement on like the Web 2 definition of identity.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's the potential for self-sovereign control of your identity information. So back to those second two categories, you know, am I who I say I am, and details about me, my birth date, or do I own something specific that I'm trying to sell you, all those things, and being able to actually control those, and yet the other party can trust that. That's the potential. Getting there will take time because it can't just be solved by blockchain, but blockchain's a key part of it.
Yeah, I agree. Having control over your own information and data, whether it goes into voting, whether it goes into advertising, or even capital markets, it's in the next 5, 10, 15 years, to me that seems very exciting, to be able to have total control over your true identity, whatever layer that may be of identity, but control over that seems really exciting.
Yeah, I think to achieve these things, like sort of control of your data wherever you are, is going to require like innovations in these sort of decentralized registry systems, because the blockchain is effectively just a decentralized public key infrastructure that you can sort of look at, you know, in a trustless way and say like, yes, this key corresponds to that signature. But where we'll really start to achieve the interoperability is when we start to connect all of these different things. Because what we haven't talked about is like, if identity is just one private key, and you're using that private key to control your data, like in effect, the data is then siloed on that private key. So once we start to get to like interoperability abstractions on top of these registries, so now you can have, you know, 100 keys for all of your different contract wallet implementations on Ethereum, and maybe you have some keys on other blockchain networks or even traditional authentication systems, like being able to tie those together in a unified way is like really, I think, where we need to get to actually deliver on sort of these things.
I'm also excited about those things, but a little bit of a different thing that I'm also excited about is, and maybe we'll get into this, sometimes it gets a little bit of a different rabbit hole, but reputation. And reputation, in my view, is really what we care about when we're talking about identity. It's about identities over time and how confident am I that this identity is going to behave or do things in certain ways. And reputation is notoriously hard and ripe for exploitation, authoritarianism, and all of these things. But if we're able to solve this problem of moving your identity data around, attaching it to different identifiers, we at uPort think we can do this using DIDs and verifiable credentials, so not putting any data on chain. So if we can keep that privacy problem, if we can address that, then I think we have the chance to build really hyper-contextualized reputation. And so you don't run into the problem of a one reputation system to rule them all like we're seeing in some nation states that are trying to do that. But I think for facilitating online interaction, it really comes down to reputation. And so that's like a kind of like a holy grail of all of this work, if we can do that and make sure it's ethical.
Yeah, I'm really actually glad that you brought that up, because my next question was going to be, when we think about the blockchain, we think about privacy, we think about like complete control over what we're doing, we think about all of these things. However, if I kind of imagine just like identity thrown on top of it, I now imagine my entire financial everything and all of my data and who my doctors are and what pills I'm on and whatever it is, right? Then also being linked to my name and then also being on a public blockchain. So, take this question however you want, go to town on it, but, what are the risks? What are the concerns? How do we mitigate them? What are the challenges that we have to overcome?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing I would say on that is I agree with the concern. If in fact the solution was I'm going to put all that private information on a blockchain unencrypted, that's just nuts. Nobody's going to do that because it's no longer private. So then you say, well, put it on there encrypted. Really forward-thinking people will say eventually, blockchain's going to have some issues with quantum computing, that sort of stuff. But you don't have to put that information on the blockchain necessarily to make it provable. You can have it off-chain and put a hash of it on the chain, and then others can still know that that is in fact the correct data that you're sharing with them. And that probably is the better way to solve that problem.
I see it as optionality. Before blockchain, it's all centralized. People will know it. Now there's an option for it to be decentralized, and also there's an option for people to be kind of on a more public space. And one like really weird use case that I've been thinking about is, maybe some user would want to build a public record of their transactions, right, to kind of prove that they're credible. So maybe they can get like zero collateral loans or things like that. Right, the public record is something that's kind of like your credit score that you kind of want to build to the outside world, whereas, say, your private transaction, the things you want to keep to yourself, there's still a way to do that.
Yeah, I think that obviously the encryption stuff, putting even encrypted data on chain is, it's not even GDPR compliant, and likely in the coming future won't be compliant really anywhere. I actually don't know. Maybe somebody knows like what the current state of the regulation and the viewpoint is on hashed data on chain. I think most of the time I've heard it talked about that right now we're operating under the assumption that it is okay, but I don't think that's been settled. So I guess there's like a regulatory risk there. One of the things that I bring up though is I'm worried about some of the emergent identity like leaking on chain, and you don't really realize it. So like one of the things that the use case I think of is you get an NFT that is like a membership of to some group, and then you use that same address to interact in some other context. So maybe this is you get an NFT saying you are the, I don't know, gambler of the month on some gambling platform, right? And that's sitting in your wallet. Maybe even you get it out of your wallet, you send it, you burn it. But then you use that same address to go and vote in if there's a blockchain voting thing, or apply for something else, right? Some government job, or I don't know. If you have an archive node, you can run back through these things, and I'm sure this will be the new form of doing a background check, and they'll be able to see these hyper-contextualized assets sitting in your wallet. And now you've tied these things together. And Those are like these edge case kind of things that I think can emerge without us thinking about it. And I think that is how we got to the Web 2 privacy problem. And so yeah, that's one I struggle with of how can we prevent that, because I see a lot of the hacking teams and stuff going down this road of don't realize that the contextualization of like an NFT or the asset says something about the person that holds it. And that's some form of identity leakage.
One of the problems we see at Portis sometimes is people forgetting their password. And for us, they're encrypted in their password. So when someone comes on, they do an email, they password, and it's with end-to-end encryption. So if you don't remember your password, essentially you lose your identity as if you lost your phone. So on a simple problem in the future, if it's truly 100% non-custodial and everything is only based on their password and they lose it, well, that's a lot of assets gone. And we want to make sure that they're not caged in such a problem. And implementing maybe smart contracts that could pull your private keys maybe from a hardware wallet where it's safe, and having some type of time delays can stop that. But, going down this path, you want to make sure that we stay true to the ethos of blockchain technology by giving this trustless, free experience, but still not caging them into something where, they have full ownership of themselves and data.
And I feel like it keeps coming this way, so I keep summarizing. But okay, so the two pieces that we've talked about. One is like, where's the data kept? Is it encrypted or not? So it's sort of like, how are you handling the storage management of that? Like, where does it reside? And the second piece is, how are you controlling that data with those keys? And so those are two totally different concepts. Like, one, I agree, should be encrypted if it's private, off-chain, can handle that in many ways. But the more complex piece is like sort of not tying that data to a specific key pair, but rather if I like authenticate into an app with Portis or Fortmatic, and that key that in their system, like the app should only ever be able to see the data from that key, but not from like all of my keys and accounts everywhere. And so I think it's like privacy management both at how like multiple accounts are linked to the same data, so you're not sort of like using one key and disclosing everything, and at the same time treating how data is stored and encrypted in better ways.
Yeah, these are all really excellent points. And what Jonny touched on, I want to kind of dive deeper into, right, is this, I think everyone on the stage has had experience with users and users shooting themselves in the foot. And so when we think about identity, reputation, on-chain data, all of those things, how or what can we do to sort of protect the user from themselves so that they can actually understand the implications of their decisions, right? And a good example is the ENS or any name service, right? Your first instinct is to go buy taylormonahan.eth. But now you know my name, and that is completely linked to my Ether address. And I may realize that, but if users don't realize that, right? So what are sort of the, the usability, the user experience hurdles so that we can both kind of protect users and also provide them with this valuable, thing, right?
Yeah, I think that I'll kick us off this time. No, I honestly think that this is a question for wallets, and like we don't make a wallet, so I'm sort of we like provide support to wallets and are we interoperate with all of them, and so I think wallets will differentiate according to these things, and that will be like the wallet's value proposition. Like ultimately, the wallet owns this relationship with the user, and in some ways can even be trusted to act as their agent. So with things like MetaMask snaps, you can like have your wallet have permissions to do things. And so I think like the term wallet and the fact that there's kind of like one size fits all approach to wallets is like broken, and instead you'll actually see different wallets serving different use cases. Some are more privacy preserving, some are dead simple, and sort of catering to different niches of users, because it's not like the problem with global platforms and global networks is like trying to reach flat consensus on everything, and like that's just not how it works for everyone. And so many different use cases for the blockchain, many different wallet interfaces, and we'll see what happens.
Let's see if I turn it back on. Okay. So at uPort for a while, we had a mobile app, working on a mobile app. We're thinking of a new way to allow maybe other people to take some of open sourcing the mobile app and allowing other people to build the contextual interfaces using our tools and stuff. So I don't know that we're going to be specifically in this business moving forward, but like while we were working on it, and I was working with Michael on it for a long time, we had this selective disclosure flow where you're telling the user what they're about to disclose about themselves. And this data is sitting on their phone, and so it's relatively safe. It's not sitting on our server or something like that. And you're gonna give up this data. And I really think at the UX level, this is like a huge problem. And I think that the potential for the entire goal of building a more privacy-preserving web with Web3 can be undermined in the last mile of identity, which is that UX, that moment when you go to disclose. So if you remember the Cambridge Analytica hack, it wasn't really a hack, the scandal, that was a failure, in my opinion, could be framed as a failure in product design and UX design. You see a login with Facebook button, and you don't know what the implications of that are, and users don't read, as Taylor, you know. And so users don't read, and they don't read that fine print that says, there was one little line in that fine print that made all the difference, which was, this app will get not only your name and your email and access to your public profile information, but it also will get access to your friends' profile information. And nobody understood the implication of that, and they just clicked ahead because the positive UX, the frictionlessness, was hard to turn down. And that's going to be a hard thing even for people building on uPort or our own uPort app when it's selective disclosure. Helping the user understand what they're consenting to. So what is informed consent is a whole other thing, right? And a very complicated topic. And but I would just wanted to add on that there's some interesting research by Alessandro Acquisti, and I forgot which university he's with, but it talked about how users change their privacy behavior at the moment of disclosure based on how the privacy benefits and risks are framed. And that's something that I've been looking at and how to apply that to an actual product environment, of how we can frame what the user's about to do in a way that helps them act in their best interest and preserve privacy rather than give it up.
Yeah, to add on to that, that's a very good point because users have different kind of requirements on privacy and things that they're okay with. And that's one of the incentives why we started to do this white label SDK, which is no longer one login button with like all these things that's in a super centralized nature and getting into all the different applications. Now we're letting the applications kind of build out their own kind of identity and what kind of privacy that these applications specifically require. Instead of one account for multiple dApps, we're making it one account, for one dApp. And as a user, you're going to have different accounts with different apps, and this would also help a lot in terms of privacy concerns as well, because that's kind of gated to that to that address, right? And for us, this move, in a way cannibalizes our initial products, but what we're really wanting to do is kind of expand the things that you can do with key management. Say, use us as one of the keys, right, for a smart contract wallet or other kind of composite identity solutions. So this is kind of, actually like super agree with that.
That's funny. One of the first things we like to try to protect for our users, as soon as they sign up or as soon as they create an account, we immediately send them an email saying, please go into your wallet and back up your private keys. Write down your phrase so that, God forbid, you forget your password, you can recover your account. Right now we have over 50,000 users and over 60 companies using us, and I can't tell you how many people actually forget their password. And you would think, being from Web 2, this is they may have that a subconscious feeling that, okay, if I forget my password, no problem, because I could always just hit, hey, I don't remember my password, please reset it. Well, I'm sorry, it's blockchain, you're in full control. End-to-end encryption, we don't have your private keys, we don't have access to it. I'm so sorry, the best I can do is delete, your account and, you can start over. So creating mechanisms in which there may be entry points into the levels of, start maybe with like a burner wallet access where it's low-level security, private keys are on their device, and then from there they can merge over to a higher security wallet. From there, maybe implement some smart contracts, which they can then do account recovery, but with time delays. So it's always this balance between security and usability while protecting the users, because we're still so early in this ecosystem that not everyone is ready to be fully decentralized, and you have to baby step them into this to protect the user.
Okay. I actually wanted to know if anyone in the audience, we have like maybe a couple minutes left, if anyone in the audience had any like burning questions that they wanted to shout out to. Yeah? I'm just going to repeat the question really quick. So he's asking, with passwords or any sort of authentication mechanisms, can we use like a fingerprint or another biometric like an eye scan for either account recovery or access or anything like that in regards to your identity?
Yeah. So you can solve some of the problem with that, and that's already being used today. Most of us probably are experiencing this on different devices where you put your fingerprint in and it's actually populating your username and password for you. So effectively you're logging in with your fingerprint if you're doing that. I mean, it still can be corrupted, right? At the end of the day, that fingerprint's being turned into data, and if somebody can hack and manipulate and copy that data, the computer on the other end doesn't know that there wasn't a finger put on the fingerprint, right? And so in the case of malicious acts, the one circumstance where companies, in my mind, need to know you are who you say you are is in the case of either you effed up and forgot something or you got hacked, right? That's when they need to know, and I'd be able to say, I need to know you are who you say you are so that I can actually help you recover something, because I don't want to give the wrong person access. So that would still be a need out there for companies. And that, in my mind, is really the one big area where companies need to know who you are. Otherwise, most of that second category of I need to know you are who you say you are is all about government. It really is all about government, except that one case of when users get hacked or make a big mistake.
Right, and I think with the blockchain, it brought more to the world about like asymmetric encryption, right, with public and private key, and I think there's a future where we'll use device, right, and you may be able to, let's say, encrypt your private key with like your biometric data, right? I would think that like I would think of those things more as identifier. Rather than something more like a password, right? There's password that's like in your head, despite like how simple it is or how complicated it is. If you use a password manager or you use biometric to secure your password, but in essence, it's really more like an identifier. And I think the public should be more like aware of that rather than seeing it as like the kind of holy grail form factor of authentication.
I'll just add one thing to that. I do know a company that is doing something in that space with biometrics and figuring out encryption for private keys. I forget the name of the company at this moment in time, but if you talk to me afterwards, I can look up the company for you and let you know.
I think I don't know if this is the same thing you're talking about, but there's another kind of, I don't know, I would consider it a little bit of a pipe dream where some people have claimed that they've been able to generate key pairs based on like a deterministically generate key pairs from biometric data. I don't know if any of that's really real or and stuff, but maybe somebody knows. But I think that even that is a problem. The problem really happens with key rotation. And you can't rotate your thumbprint if your thumbprint gets compromised. And so we've seen, like, let's say it's facial recognition, right? And we've already seen, and let's say we managed to create a deterministic private, cryptography, and based on your biometric data of your face, let's say. And then we find out that people can build these realistic 3D models, right? And you can't rotate your face now, right? And you're compromised forever moving forward in that regard. So biometrics, if you're not careful, they lock you into a single key forever, right? And I think that that's like a major problem.
Excellent points. Well, we are out of time. I just want to say thank you to all of our panelists and all of you for joining us. And obviously, if you guys have any other questions, we're literally right here. Come ask us. Thank you.